Hello, Swifto here. Today I want to do something a little bit different from what I normally do on this channel, because on the 25th of February this year, 2026, Rob Grant passed away suddenly at the age of 70, and I feel like I have to say something about it. Maybe I'm not really the best person to be doing a tribute video to him, as I've never met him, and to be honest with you, I don't really know an awful lot about him. But despite that, in a funny kind of way, he's actually one of the most influential people in my life, along with Doug Naylor, for creating the TV series Red Dwarf, which I am a massive fan of. I want to make this little video to celebrate some of his work, and also to talk about how he has personally influenced my own life over the years that I've been a fan of his writing. He wrote several novels, worked on TV shows, radio, and I think at one point he did a bit of stand-up comedy too. Unfortunately, I'm not as well versed on his other non-Red Dwarf work, only dipping my toes into a little bit of shows like Spitting Image and Son of Cliché. One other show that he wrote in the early 2000s was a show called The Strangerers, which sounds like a really cool idea and something I'd really like to learn more about. It's about these alien characters that come to Earth and have all sorts of mishaps trying to work out the odd behaviours of human beings. I wish I could tell you more about it, but I've not been able to find it anywhere. It only lasted one series and wasn't released on DVD and is seldom talked about. But I'd really like to have a look at it, and if anyone knows where I can find the episodes, please let me know. Rob Grant also wrote several novels such as Colony and Incompetence. Unfortunately, due to my own incompetence, I've not got round to reading these yet, but I hear good things about them. I have, however, read the Red Dwarf novels, Infinity Welcomes Careful Drivers, Better Than Life, and Backwards, which of course are based on the TV series, though they exist in their own time-space separate from the TV show. Better Than Life is actually one of my all-time favourite books. I think it's the best one of the Red Dwarf books, and I would highly recommend it to any Red Dwarf fan who has never read any of the books. Though make sure to read the first one before you read Better Than Life, as Better Than Life is a continuation of the story. It's heartbreaking, just as the 5th Red Dwarf novel was just about to release, Red Dwarf Titan, that Rob Grant should be taken away from us, never to see the fans' reaction to the new book, and realise what else he may have been planning for future Red Dwarf stories. At the time of recording, Red Dwarf Titan is going to be released in July of this year, and can be pre-ordered from Amazon or wherever you buy books from. I'm really looking forward to reading it, but at the same time, now there will be a slight sadness while reading, knowing that this is the last thing that Rob Grant ever wrote for the series. It is the first Red Dwarf content that he's given us since Backwards, which came out all the way back in 1996. It is sad, but hopefully the new book will give us plenty of laughs. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about how Red Dwarf and Rob Grant have affected me personally over the years. Rob Grant co-created Red Dwarf with Doug Naylor and worked on the show for its first 6 series. For most of those episodes, my mum decided to tape them off the telly, and those videotapes that she made ended up being watched by me as a young boy for many years, captivating my attention and helped shape my love for comedy, science fiction, and most importantly for me, writing. Like I assume is true for all writers, I've taken inspiration from a great deal many things over the years, from books, movies, TV shows, real-life memories, or stories that other people have told me. But when I think about the people and things that have inspired me and my writing the most, there are 5 that immediately spring to mind as being my biggest inspirations, especially when it comes to writing comedy and science fiction, my 2 most favourite story genres. There's H.G. Wells, classic Doctor Who, Douglas Adams, Futurama, and of course, Red Dwarf. I consider Red Dwarf to be my biggest and most important inspiration because it was the first one. I remember when I was just a little boy, far too young to be watching an adult show like Red Dwarf. I'd go to school and nothing seemed to make much sense to me. It was all confusing and boring, kind of rubbish. They seemed more interested in filling my head with their own ideas of how the world should work, rather than allowing me the space to work it out for myself and teaching me in a way that was engaging and something that I could understand. So while I was at primary school learning about God and angels, heaven and hell and all that stuff that bored the smeg out of me, I could then go home and watch those old tapes of Red Dwarf, which was just so much more interesting with its spaceships and time travel, robots, monsters, and all that good sci-fi stuff which sparked my imagination. This was the 1990s, so there was no Doctor Who for me to watch, and my mum wasn't really much of a sci-fi fan, so I never got as much of it as I wanted back then. I remember we had a very worn-out videotape of Captain Scarlet, and occasionally I'd see the odd episode of Star Trek on telly. But other than that, Red Dwarf was pretty much the only thing I had, and my main and first experience with anything sci-fi related. I would watch those tapes over and over again as a kid, almost becoming a little obsessive about it, lying in bed thinking about it and wondering about all the little things and bits and pieces of things that I didn't quite understand. I'd often have trouble sleeping when I was younger, and I would just stare up at the stars, thinking about space travel and other planets and aliens and travelling in time and dimension jumping. These thoughts seemed much more interesting than the religious and very earth-based concerns that they insisted on boring me with at school. I guess my mum liked this show because it was funny, and back then I wasn't really aware of how funny it was. I just liked it because it was about people in space doing spacey things, in space with space stuff, you know? Space. But in a way, that was really great for me, because I could enjoy it as a young boy for all the cool sci-fi stuff, and then as I got older, I could re-watch it and start to understand some of the jokes. For a time, around my late childhood to early 20s, I'd come back to the show every now and then and re-watch them all again. And it seemed like every time I did, there was new jokes for me to understand and new little details which I'd either forgotten about or never noticed before. And those shows were just so full of jokes and interesting ideas and little details. For many years it remained this almost evergreen show that I could enjoy over and over. Unfortunately these days I've watched them so many times since childhood. There are large parts that are so ingrained into my memory that it's hard to try and re-watch them with fresher eyes. So I have to leave bigger gaps in between revisiting the show, longer than I used to leave it when I was younger. I was never one of those kids that thought what was happening on TV was real. I can remember sitting in my mum's living room when I was just a wee boy and thinking what it would be like if the cast of Red Dwarf was there sitting with me, wondering if they would be like their characters or if they would be very different. At first I thought I'd really like to be in Red Dwarf as an actor and get to meet the characters on screen, in real life. But then I would think up stories of my own, just silly childish things, mostly just repeating what they'd already done. But that's when I realised that actually, instead of being an actor, I thought I'd prefer to be writing the stories themselves. Only I didn't think I could ever write something as great as Red Dwarf. So I then started making up my own stories instead. This has then led me on a lifelong ambition of mine to become a successful writer one day, and write something which is as great, or almost as great, as Red Dwarf. I think it's just one of those things, even without Red Dwarf I'd probably still be thinking up little stories in my head. I have no real control over it really. But certainly Red Dwarf helped me enormously to realise this burning desire within me, and made me want to write primarily comedy and science fiction. Nobody around seemed to understand me, and I was always a very shy, quiet kid who everyone thought was just odd or needed counselling or something because he didn't like football or doing whatever else normal young boys do. Instead, I just preferred to quietly play with my toys, making up stories, and watching those Red Dwarf tapes over and over again. Later I started buying the DVDs, and I discovered from listening to the commentary tracks and watching the extra features that the actors were pretty much like their characters in the show. At least in some ways, maybe not in other ways. But it was surprising to see how similar they were in some respects. So that thought I had when I was a kid, wondering what they were like, had been answered by the DVDs. Even more surprising was discovering that I was not alone with my love for Red Dwarf. The first Red Dwarf DVD I got was Series 2 on DVD, which had the A to Z of Red Dwarf. I had spent so much of my childhood thinking about Red Dwarf and wishing that I could find others who thought about the little details of it as much as I did. With the DVDs, I discovered a whole other world almost, with people involved with the show as well as fans of the show, all talking about how much they loved it too. But it was only then that I discovered that Rob Grant and Doug Naylor had split up in their writing partnership many years before. So although Rob Grant would appear now and then in the DVD extras, he always seemed like a more elusive, mysterious half of the Gestalt entity known as Grant Naylor. He was there, but just not as much as Doug Naylor, who of course was still on board the Red Dwarf ship, keeping her going. Then years later I remember watching an episode of Carpool that he did with Robert Llewellyn, which was a YouTube show that he used to do. It was really good, by the way. He talked to a lot of different people, including a lot of people involved with Red Dwarf. If you type it into YouTube, you should be able to find it easily. Highly recommend it. But I remember that episode in particular because, as I say, Rob Grant was always a little bit more elusive when it came to the DVD extras. So it was great to hear a bit more about his side of the story, and I really enjoyed listening to it. I have no idea what happened between Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, of course, and it seems unlikely that we'll ever know the whole truth now. But I have to say that both Rob Grant and Doug Naylor come across as being extremely nice and down-to-earth, very funny guys. I have a great deal of respect for both men for creating such a huge and long-lasting phenomenon like Red Dwarf. Though I have to be honest and say that series 1 to 6 are what I really love. The later series, with Doug Naylor being the main driving force, still have some good episodes here and there and some very good ideas and great moments, but really those first 6 series with the 2 writers is just unbeatable. They have both inspired me so much as a writer, and revisiting the series always sparks my imagination and makes me want to get back into my writing again, in the futile attempt to create something almost as great as Red Dwarf. I know I'll never succeed, but it really makes me want to try. Later on, like everyone else who wasn't a member of Parliament or too rich for the rules to apply to them, we all had to suffer through the whole COVID lockdown of 2020, that weird social experiment where we all had to sit in our homes for a year twiddling our thumbs, while they had parties and laughed at us for being so stupid. But to help out during that time, Ed Bye, Paul Jackson and Rob Grant all got together to do a series of commentaries for the first 3 series of Red Dwarf. When I found out about this through their YouTube channel Red Dwarf Quarantine, I signed up for it and tuned into their live broadcasts, which was a lot of fun to listen to. As well as being very entertaining, it was also very informative, giving us some new information about the making of those shows. There were a couple of things about this experience which will always be treasured memories for as long as I can remember them. While the commentary was being done live, there was a live chat for us to give our own thoughts and silly comments for them to read while it was going on at the same time. I can remember making Ed Bye laugh when we were asked to say where we were watching from, and I said I was watching from all the way in exotic Scotland, or something like that. Then there was one episode where Paul Jackson was having a rant about getting annoyed at people for showing up late. After he'd finished saying what he said, I said, "Sorry I'm late, did I miss anything?" Which got a response from him, which made me laugh very loudly. It was such a huge thrill for me on those occasions when I made some silly joke or comment and managed to get a little bit of a laugh out of Rob Grant himself. It was a slightly surreal and amazing feeling. This guy who'd I admired for so many years from afar, who had been responsible for giving me so much entertainment and helping me through a difficult childhood and my difficult teen years and difficult adulthood, I had managed to make him laugh. It was such a great feeling. Although having said that, I remember one moment on the last day episode commentary where I mentioned the earring that Cat gave Crichton that he apparently hated was then worn by the cat in an episode later on in Series 4, implying that the cat had selfishly taken back his gift to Crichton in his typical cat-like way. Rob Grant actually read out this comment of mine on the commentary, and I feel slightly guilty that I made that comment without checking to make sure if it was actually correct or not. but even now I must confess that I'm still not sure if it's true or not. It would be funny, very cat-like, if it is true. I hope it is, and that I didn't just give Mr. Grant some false information. Another memory I have of those lockdown commentaries they made is that it was my one and only time that I ever reached out to Rob Grant. They'd asked us to send any questions we would like to ask them on the episodes and send it to Rob Grant's email address, or at least the one that they provided for us. Being the massive coward that I am, I actually debated with myself for several days about if I should, and what should I ask if I decided to send my questions. Finally, I worked up the courage to send an email, hoping that I'd asked good questions and had not just made a fool of myself in front of a hero of mine by making any stupid mistakes in my spelling or asking really rubbish questions, or who knows what other foolish thing I may have done. But that's just me being a scaredy little coward that I am. I always think, I'd love to meet all these legendary figures one day. Like I'd love to have met Rob Grant, and I'd like to meet Doug Neil, or some of the Doctor Who people like Tom Baker or Fraser Hines, or other childhood legends of mine like, I don't know, Billy Connolly or Matt Groening or someone like that. Or like I dreamed when I was a boy, like the cast of Red Dwarf, Craig Charles, Chris Barry, Norman Lovett, and everyone else, you know. But then I would think to myself, well, what could I possibly say to, I don't know, Tom Baker that he hasn't heard a million times already? I mean, I would have loved to have tried to start a conversation with Rob Grant through email and maybe have gotten to know him a little bit. But then I thought to myself, well, I'm sure he's probably very busy with other things and people far more important than myself. He's not going to be bothered with the likes of me, is he? I mean, who am I? I'm nobody important. And he's a legend. He's one of the people that created Red Dwarf, for smeg's sake. So I never bothered to try and start a conversation with him, sadly. I just thought he'd probably be very busy. Though in retrospect, perhaps at the time when everyone was on lockdown, it might have been the best time to try, I don't know. I'm sure he could have given me great advice on writing and shared some great stories about the behind the scenes working on TV or getting books published. But what could I have given him in return? Very little, I expect. But although I lacked the courage to talk to him, I did send an email, just with my questions on it. I then got a reply from Rob himself, actually, simply saying thanks for the questions. And I'm very grateful to him because over the course of the series of the commentaries that they did, I think he pretty much answered every question that I asked him. I'm not sure if it was directly because of my email or if others had asked the same or similar questions, but I like to think that he took note of my email and was kind enough to make sure that he answered everyone who emailed in. And that's something I really feel I could take away from those lockdown commentaries. The once slightly mysterious Rob Grant was there in the light and willing to interact with us fans and allow us to see that behind the mystery, he was just a good guy with a great sense of humour and willing to talk about Red Dwarf, even though it seems at one point he was pretty much done with it and didn't want anything else to do with it. At least that's how it felt to me, and probably to others, not knowing much about him beforehand or what had happened at that time period. One last thing I wanted to mention about those lockdown commentaries was that it wasn't just the commentaries they were doing at that time. They also had another series going on at the same time, which was to help out theatres that were struggling a bit at the time, obviously with everything in lockdown. People could pay a little bit of money to see real actors perform a little show through webcams and help raise funds doing so. One of these shows that they did, and I'm sorry to say I forget the name of it now, was a reading of a script that Rob Grant had written. It was a project he had worked on with Aardman Animation, the same people that made Wallace and Gromit and Creature Comforts, if you're unaware. It was going to be a children's show, if I recall correctly, and was about a family of aliens doing all sorts of funny alien family things. It was quite fun to listen to and I really enjoyed it. But what was really eye-opening about it for me was seeing Rob Grant during the performance and his reaction to it when it was over. He was very quiet and seemed almost as if he was shy. He expressed that he'd been very nervous about showing off this old script of his and was very grateful that it had gone so well. Now this might sound a bit silly, but I think it's very easy to forget sometimes that all those names you see in the credits at the end of a movie or a TV show or whatever, most of them are all real people. Just people like you and me, with their own hopes and dreams, fears and anxieties. Sometimes we forget that even people we might assign to our minds as legends or heroes are just people like you and me. So it was a real eye-opening moment for me, and in some ways a very reassuring moment, to see that even a legend like Rob Grant still gets nervous about what people might think of his writing. For me, it sort of demystified him in my mind. No longer just a mysterious name attached to a show and book series that I love. As someone who's a massive coward, also someone who desperately desires to be a writer one day as well, it was very reassuring that the co-creator of Red Dwarf, my biggest and longest inspiration for wanting to write in the first place, could also just be as nervous as I feel in sharing my writings with others. So in a way it sort of gives me a bit more confidence in sharing my writing, even though I'll never be as great as Rob Grant. I just started this Swift Stories channel around the same time as the lockdown, and although I had thought about doing audio stories for several years before, and had done a little experiment with it on a previous channel of mine, I think one of the things that really encouraged me to push the boat out and pursue my dream of getting my stories out there was watching and listening to those commentary podcasts and audio dramas that those three Red Dwarf legends put together. My thoughts go out to Rob Grant's friends and family at this difficult time, but at least they have the knowledge that he brought so much joy to so many people, and so many great new insults to share with the smegging goits out there. It's still only a dream of mine to one day write something that's even just half as good as Red Dwarf, but I'm still pursuing that dream. I feel that I'll never succeed, but I'm trying. I feel I owe a great deal of respect to pay to Rob Grant for being one of those people responsible for sparking my imagination, my love for astronomy, science fiction and comedy. Thanks for the memory, Rob Grant. Thank you for all the laughs and thought-provoking stories. Thank you for entertaining so many of us for so many years and inspiring us to become writers. I know now that I'm not alone in my dreams. I have you and others who worked on Red Dwarf to thank for it. So thank you, Rob Grant. Thank you for allowing this sad, lonely little boy the chance to laugh and to dream. And thank you very much for listening, all who did. Let's all smoke a kipper for Rob Grant. He'll be back for breakfast. Thank you.